After years of reading 1,000-page Stephen King books and things like that, I figured it was time to read something a little bit smaller. The one I chose for this one is a little bit underrated. A book that not a lot of people on Booktube or just in general really talk about, but I thought it was worth a mention. Hi, I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, and this is my review of Stephen King's Elevation. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, composer for film, television, and gaming, specializing in book adaptations, now also a booktuber. You can find my music in The Wheel of Time Season 2, His Dark Materials Season 3, and the official Brent Week's companion album for his series, Lightbringer. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Elevation by Stephen King. So this is a book that doesn't get much love, and I can see why in some respects. I can also say that it is a little bit underrated at the same time. So let's talk a little bit about it. So first, let's talk a little bit about why I chose to read Elevation by Stephen King. So, Stephen King has amazing characters. He will sometimes do slow burns that really pay off in the final act. Sometimes he'll do, fantastic concepts that are really building and then somehow disappoint you in the ending. He's imperfect as an author, but he's still my favorite author of all time. I've been trying to read all his books, and so I figured, I've been reading a lot of chonkers of his. I'd read Needful Things earlier this year. I'm on different seasons right now. I was reading 4 Past Midnight a few months ago. I figured it might be time to pick up something a little smaller. And this book I don't see talked about too much, probably because it's his shortest book. It's really more like a novella. It's like 150 pages, and, it's not really intensive reading. It's even illustrated on some pages, Not as much of a substantial read in terms of the quantity of pages and the depth of the characters. It is a quick read, but it is still a noteworthy read, and that's kind of why I figured I would share a little bit about it. Books. This is the 46th book I've read now by Stephen King, so I figured it was worth a mention. So that's kind of why I chose this book, is to break up some of these bigger books and kind of try something a little off the map. So let's talk a little bit about what it's about. So I'm going to actually read the inside flap here. And that'll give you a little bit more contextual references to what this book actually is about. Castle Rock is a small town where word gets around quickly. That's why Scott Carey wants to confide only in his friend, Dr. Bob Ellis, about his strange condition. He's losing weight without getting thinner, and the scales register the same whether he is in his clothes or out of them, no matter how heavy they are. Scott also has new neighbors who have opened a fine dining experience in town, although it's an experience being shunned by the locals. Deirdre McComb and her wife, Missy Donaldson, don't exactly conform to a lifestyle the community approves of. And now Scott seems trapped in a feud with the couple over their dogs dropping their business on his lawn. Missy may be warm and friendly, but Deirdre is cold as ice. As the town prepares for its annual Thanksgiving 12K run, Scott begins to understand the prejudices the women face and tries to help. Unlikely alliances form, and the mystery of Scott's affliction brings out the best in people who have indulged the worst in themselves and others. And that is Stephen King's Elevation. Let's see when this one came out. So this one came out in 2018, so very recently. He hadn't released anything, I think, at that point in a couple years. So this was the book that was released. I think people were probably disappointed in its length because it's just so short. And people were hoping that they would get another substantial Stephen King read like people were used to. But I would say don't slouch on this book because, as you could tell, it's not like his usual standard affair. It does have stuff that would remind you of, say, Thinner, the Richard Bachman book that he wrote under his pseudonym Richard Bachman. But it's actually quite a different story to that, because it's not really about getting thin at all. It's more about, if a character has to deal with an unforeseen circumstance, what kind of qualities will that bring out of them? Will that make them a better person, a worser person? How will it affect the people around that person? I thought that was the most compelling part of this read, is, the fact that, this is a very human story with human elements. I mean, there's that supernatural element of him losing weight, but when he takes off his clothes or he puts on his clothes or anything he's wearing on his person, it shows the same as what if he didn't have those pieces of clothing on. So kind of an interesting take on the thinner idea, but really it's not about the supernatural element at all. As you could tell, it's a very human story about, this lesbian couple and their dog, and how, he has kind of problems with his neighbors, and he has to kind of learn to overcome that. and how the character relationships and things start to evolve as they go along. So, I kind of wanted to mention a little bit about the context of what this book is about. The one thing I thought was really interesting also was Scott Carey and his evolution throughout the book. Because, and this kind of sounds funny to say because it is such a short book, but he really evolves as a person as he kind of grapples with this, incurable illness, right? I mean, incurable, I'm not spoiling anything, but like, that's not something that people have ever heard of, let alone have a cure for. So it's like, how does he deal with that? Can he stop it in time? And also, how does that affect the people he's around, and kind of how he deals with kind of problematic situations in his life? Because if you think about it, when you have a life-changing circumstance happen, the things that would normally really annoy you or really ruin your day don't necessarily have the same effect, right? You have bigger problems to think about. And so I think that idea of the human emotion of how you deal with acceptance, and dealing with things from a point of grace, I thought was really compelling. So that's one thing I really liked about it. I also thought that his relationship with Deirdre and her wife Missy, I thought was very endearing as well. The way they kind of grow together and the way they learn from each other through the course of this book feels like something you would have seen in a longer Stephen King novel. I thought that was really compelling as well. And I also felt that kind of the third act with the 20K race and things like that was very interesting as well, because you kind of start to see little... And this is, I'm going to keep it as high level so it doesn't spoil it, because this is very important to me that it doesn't spoil anything for you. But think about if you were getting thinner, right? Weighed less when you got on the scale every day, but you look the same physically. What would that do to your biology? Would that change your muscular structure? Would that change your bone structure? And how would that affect you in your day-to-day life? That's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So he was Stephen King was kind of going towards not just psychological, but the scientific aspects of like, if this was actually possible, what would actually happen in that circumstance? So I thought that was really, really interesting. So those are the things I liked about it and why I thought it was worth a read. This is something you could read in one sitting. So it's just something that you could really just like, it's a nice little snack between meals. You can enjoy it in the day, and it was a quick read. I read it in one day myself. And so, I would highly recommend it from that standpoint. Now, is it for, the question becomes then, is it a must read for King? I don't think so. I felt like there were certain things that were a little rushed because, again, 150-page book, how much are these characters really going to get fleshed out? I think still he does a remarkable job with fleshing them out and kind of making those relationships feel real and believable, and kind of the human element and the existential quandary they go through as characters, both together and as individuals. I thought that was really compelling. But of course, with a little bit more length, with a little bit more of the Castle Rock presence, because I think I forgot to mention, this is also the last Castle Rock story as well. So to see a little bit more of the town and get to know more of the characters, I think has always been Stephen King's strong suit. That part of it was lacking in here. And I also felt like the ending was very poetic, but I think it could have probably been, done a little bit more, with a little bit more finesse, for lack of a better word. And again, that is something that I think Stephen King, even being my favorite author, I think he struggles with that in certain stories, just even, regardless of the length of the stories. And then also, I think with a story as short as this one, it's that much harder to really provide that compelling ending. But I will say, it was a very moving ending, a very poignant ending as well. So, I'm a Stephen King completionist. So for me, this is perfect. This is a kind of book I would want to read. Would it be good for people who want to read every Stephen King book? Absolutely. They must check it out. Definitely. Would it be good for people who are casual Stephen King readers? I would say not necessarily. If you're curious about the story on its own merit, then definitely check it out. It's a fun read, But for people who are, just wanting to read his greatest hits, this is definitely not up there with them. I would say this is mid to lower tier King. But, my personal opinion, and you could tell because I have a whole shelf dedicated to the man back there, but my personal opinion is even his lower tier stuff is very compelling because of two things. One, concept. Two, characters. He really builds out the worlds and makes you feel like you're there. So that is, that's something he just does well no matter what story he writes, even if it's good, even if it's not so great. So I don't think that he's, in my humble opinion, written a terrible book. I think there's some that are very uneven. There's some that are very mid-tier or lower tier. This would probably fall in that, but it's still a fun read, And so what would I give it as a reader? I would say 3.5 stars out of 5. I think it was a solid read. I really enjoyed it. I don't regret it. I might even read it again, honestly. I probably want to do a Stephen King reread once I finish all his books. At any case, so that is definitely a goal in the far future. But in the meantime, I kind of wanted to give my quick thoughts, spoiler free, of course. All my reviews on this channel are going to be spoiler free because the goal is to get you to read the books and not just to listen to the cliff notes, because that's what is the fun thing that I've always gotten from watching Booktube, and I always want to pay that forward. And this is a book I haven't heard too much about, so I figured what better way to celebrate the man and kind of celebrate his work than to talk about Elevation by Stephen King. Now, that concludes the review, but let me know in your thoughts if you've read this book or if it's on your list. Let me know also if you find it compelling, like something that you'd want to check out, or if it sounds like something you wouldn't check out, because I always want this to be a dialogue. It's fun to chat about where we agree, where we disagree, and why. It's about having a conversation about these books, and that's what's the most important part to me, and the most important part to our community. So please feel free to leave it in the comments. Please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel if you haven't already, and you've been watching and enjoying this content. I really appreciate you being here, and pressing the like and subscribe buttons will really help the channel as well. So with that, I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Thank you so much for watching. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.